She swore she saw a face between the vines. "Welcome to Simenon Secrets. I am your host, Eldridge. Love being part of this sleuthing community. Where in the world are you watching from? Hearing from you always brightens the mystery. Let's begin. It is a truth universally ignored by gardeners that their finest blooms are most often discovered by trespassers and murderers. At least, such was the case on the languid spring morning when Lord Peter Wimsey, languishing himself, as it happened, in the drawing-room of Braithwaite Hall, was interrupted not by the post nor the promise of decent tea, but by the frantic arrival of Mrs. Dalloway, housekeeper, whose notions of propriety included reporting all calamities in a voice calculated "To awaken the dead, my lord, if you please. Oh, my lord," she intoned, wringing her hands with the righteous indignation of one who has always suspected the begonias of harbouring secrets. "It's Miss Charteris, sir. In the greenhouse, if you please. The most dreadful thing. Her hat, and then, well, she—" broke off, shuddering with theatrical relish. Wimsey, whose attitude to calamity was one of private amusement laced with courtesy, rose and replaced his half-read volume of Catullus with an air of stoic resignation. "Never, Mrs. Dalloway, have I known a greenhouse to augur good news. Take me to your scene of horticultural horror." The greenhouse at Braithwaite Hall was the sort of glass folly which Victorians had constructed as a symbol of optimism, and more often family decline. It was heated by an antique boiler that coughed like a tubercular uncle and stocked with rare ferns, orchids of uncertain parentage, and one or two botanical monstrosities that had outlived both their sponsors and their Latin labels. The door, Wimsey noted with mild interest, was ajar. Unusual for Mrs. Dalloway, who had opinions on the subject of drafts and criminal behaviour, considering them of equal gravity. Within, the morning sunlight was already burning off the mist, illuminating the moats and the moist green odour of peat. Miss Charteris, recently returned from the Antipodes and possessed of a taste for bright hats and melancholic poetry, lay half-sprawled on the stone floor, one arm crooked oddly beneath her. Her rose-coloured cloche had fallen several feet, away an oasis of gaiety in the sepulchral gloom. "Touch nothing, Mrs. Dalloway, if you please," said Wimsey lightly, "and pray restrain your natural impulse to cover the dear girl with an antimacassar." The housekeeper muttered a benediction. Whether for Miss Charteris's soul or her own composure, it was hard to say. Wimsey meanwhile knelt and examined the scene with the air of a man seeking the answer to a crossword, rather than the clue to a death. The body bore no visible wound, and the shattered remains of a clay pot lay near the victim's hand. Its precious contents, a rare Hoya carnosa, now irretrievably mingled with common earth. A faint smear of blood, barely more than a scratch really, marked the inside of Miss Charteris's wrist. The greenhouse door creaked in the breeze, and somewhere in the shadows a delicate glass bell chimed, a note both sweet and unnerving. "Well," said Wimsey, rising and dusting off his knees. "If nothing else, Mrs. Dalloway, your begonias are now assured a place in the criminal annals of England. Kindly inform the constable that a lady has died, a flower is bereft, and a mystery, like an orchid, requires warmth, patience, and no little cunning to unfold. I'll be in the library. And please send for Bunter. I shall require a magnifying glass and, if at all possible, some decent coffee." As he departed, Lord Peter's eye lingered for a moment on the strange alignment of footprints in the damp moss, the glint of a silver locket tangled in the vines, and the soft, persistent drip of condensation, like the ticking of a clock, marking the beginning of another small but significant tragedy in the polite wilderness of the English countryside. And thus, with a quibble about the misquoting of Horace in times of distress and a stray botanical observation, Lord Peter Wimsey stepped into the affair of the glimpse in the greenhouse, where death was as much a matter of taste as of opportunity. Certainly. Here is Section 2, unfolding directly from the previous scene, deepening both the domestic detail and the creeping sense of unease, with Wimsey's tone and Sayers' style intact. Lord Peter found the library of Braithwaite Hall, for all its Victorian pretensions, and gloomy oak panelling, peculiarly ill-suited to the sober contemplation of death. One could almost hear the disapproval radiating from the ancestral portraits, particularly Sir Alaric Braithwaite, who had once felled a poacher with a single blow from a copy of Tacitus, and who now regarded Wimsey's intrusion with a glare. That suggested both poor sportsmanship and inferior Latin. Still, Wimsey reflected, murder was nothing if not a disruption of tradition, and Braithwaite Hall had always had a taste for the dramatic. He was joined presently by Bunter, whose appearance with notebook and a discreetly steaming tray was as reliable as the Westminster chimes and almost as reassuring. Wimsey's first order of business, as ever, was the acquisition of coffee strong enough to rouse the dead, and the briefest of discussions about the merits of Ethiopian beans in matters requiring intellectual stamina. "Thank you, Bunter. There's a certain poetry to murder among the orchids, don't you think? The greenhouse, you will observe, is a microcosm of English domesticity. Overheated, moist, and with every prospect of producing a corpse in season." "Indeed, my lord," replied Bunter with characteristic equanimity. "Mrs. Dalloway informs me that Dr. Langley has been summoned. There is also, I gather, some agitation among the under-gardeners." "Under-gardeners are invariably agitated," said Wimsey, "except when they are drunk or dead, and the latter is by no means so frequent as crime fiction would suggest. Kindly make a note of the following: the position of Miss Charteris's body, the direction of the footprints, curious pattern, more of that in due course, and the disposition of broken glass and clay. Also be on the lookout for a silver locket, entwined, rather symbolically, I thought, in the arms of a Hoya carnosa. I shall want a word with Mrs. Dalloway and whoever last saw Miss Charteris alive. And Bunter, my lord, discourage the constable from tramping about with his regulation boots. There's more to be learned from mud than from testimony, at this stage." Bunter's eyebrow performed its characteristic semaphore of understanding, and he glided from the room, leaving Wimsey to the congenial company of a half-dozen first editions and his own rapidly sharpening curiosity. The air in the hall, he noted, was unusually tense. Servants whispered in clusters, and the ancient grandfather clock in the corridor, whose chimes were normally as soothing as a curate's sermon, seemed now to toll with particular emphasis. It was not long before Mrs. Dalloway was ushered in, her composure still ruffled but her sense of duty unbowed. Wimsey gestured her to a chair, selected the most comfortable for himself, and fixed her with a gaze which had reduced footmen to honesty and duchesses to tears. "Mrs. Dalloway, I wish to spare you unnecessary distress, so I'll ask only what I must. Miss Charteris, she had been in the greenhouse this morning, you say?" "Yes, my lord, she was ever so fond of the greenhouse, Miss Charteris. Since coming back from Australia, she spent most mornings there, especially after breakfast. Said it reminded her of the Sydney Botanic Gardens, though I wouldn't know myself. She liked to be alone mostly. Not one for company, Miss Charteris, unless you count Mr. William." "William?" "Our under-gardener, sir. Young man, local, good references. Miss Charteris would ask after the more delicate blooms. Couldn't. Abide slugs, always early too. Said she liked the light best before 10 o'clock. Wimsey made a note, his pen scratching softly. "And this morning?" Mrs. Dalloway dabbed her eyes, though Wimsey suspected it was more for propriety's sake than from grief. "She finished her breakfast a bit before 9. Said she'd go see how her ferns were coming along. She'd had a fright yesterday, thought she saw a snake, but it was just a length of old hose, thank goodness. I saw her walking down to the greenhouse at 9:30. That was the last. I saw until, well, you know. Did you notice anyone else heading that way? A visitor, perhaps? Or any staff?" The housekeeper pursed her lips. "Mr. William was in the potting shed, I think. Mrs. Harrow, the cook, she was in the kitchen all morning, says she saw nothing. The only other was Mr. Felix Braithwaite. That is young master's cousin. Arrived yesterday from Oxford up at all hours. Likes to take the air before breakfast, so he says." "Ah, the air of suspicion, perhaps." Wimsey smiled gently. "And Mr. Felix, did he seem out of sorts?" Mrs. Dalloway hesitated. "Not out of sorts exactly, my lord. Quiet, a bit pale. He's not like the rest of the family. Always reading and those odd foreign books. Kept himself to himself, but then he's been away so long. Still, he and Miss Charteris, they didn't get on, not since that business about the will. Whimsy's eyebrow arched in a manner that suggested both curiosity and a passing acquaintance with the ways of English inheritance. "Ah, yes, the will, the source of much domestic felicity. Thank you, Mrs. Dalloway. If you think of anything, else a quarrel perhaps or a visitor unaccounted for, do let me know. And send in young William, if you please." She retreated, and Bunter, silent as an adverb, slipped in with a discreet cough. "The local constable has arrived, my lord, and Dr. Langley is examining the body. There is, if I may add, some discussion among the gardeners regarding a window left open in the greenhouse overnight. Mr. William is waiting." Whimsy nodded, his mind already working over the pattern, the solitary habits of the victim, the morning ritual, the proximity of family and servants, the perennial temptations of money and jealousy, and that faint, uncanny sense that the greenhouse itself was a stage, every pot and pane set for tragedy. William was a wiry youth with a nervous disposition, hands perpetually stained with loam and gilt. He stood before Whimsy, cap in hand, shifting from foot to foot as if already standing in the dock. "William," said Whimsy kindly, "I don't suppose you saw Miss Charteris after breakfast?" "No, my lord. She was in before I got there." "I was sorting pots at the back. Didn't hear nothing unusual, not till Mrs. Dalloway started shouting. I thought maybe a pane had come loose again, with the wind last night." "You didn't see anyone else? No one moving near the greenhouse?" William shook his head. "Only Mr. Felix out by the orchard. Looked in a hurry, but then he always does. Never talks much, not to the staff. And the window, was it left open?" "I closed it myself last night, my lord. Miss Charteris always said the ferns couldn't take a draught, but this morning it was wide open. Odd, that." "Very odd, indeed," murmured Whimsy, eyes distant. "And the locket. Did you ever notice Miss Charteris wearing a silver locket?" William frowned. "Not regular, my lord. She wore pearls most days. Locket must have been a keepsake, maybe from her." "Father, she said once there were things best kept shut, like letters or old greenhouses." Whimsy thanked him, dismissed him gently, and rose. In the hallway, the clock chimed the hour with an oddly hollow resonance, as if time itself were keeping secrets. He turned back to Bunter. A locket, an open window, a morning ritual disturbed, and a cousin with a reason to resent the victim. "I suspect, Bunter, that our little domestic tragedy has roots rather deeper than the begonias. Let us speak to Dr. Langley and see if death for once tells its own tale." And so the investigation, like the greenhouse, began to fill with shadows, each detail beckoning, each silence promising some small, chilling revelation yet to come. The approach to the greenhouse had a quality of gentle accusation about it, as if each leaf and misted pane were witnesses who, though timid, might be coaxed to betray what they knew. Whimsy, with Bunter in tow, met Dr. Langley at the threshold. The local physician, a balding man with the air of someone perpetually dampened by the English climate, straightened up from beside the body, his spectacles misted over. "Unpleasant business, Lord Peter." "Very unpleasant," Langley began, lowering his voice as though the orchids themselves might be scandalized. "Miss Charteris, no sign of violence, though she struck her head on the flagstones in falling. Cause of death appears to be a seizure, perhaps heart failure, though I must say she was young for it." Whimsy crouched, peering over the doctor's shoulder. "You'd not expect nature to make so tactful an arrangement, would you, Doctor? No weapon, no blood, and a neat collapse amongst the ferns. A poetic death, except for the locket, the open window, and the small matter of timing." Langley huffed, pocketing his stethoscope. "If there's a mystery here, it's not one my profession can easily diagnose. There's a faint bruise at the wrist you'll have seen. Could have been an accident. Caught on the edge of a pot, perhaps, or a struggle, but there's no other sign." Whimsy thanked him and let his gaze linger on the broken fragments of the clay pot. "One often finds the most illuminating evidence scattered in the margins, Dr. Langley. I wonder if you'd be so kind as to let Bunter have a look at the locket before the constable arrives. He has a gentle touch and a sharper eye than the average rural lawman." Bunter, unassuming as always, knelt to retrieve the small silver locket tangled among the vines. He polished it on his handkerchief with a discretion that would not have shamed a confessor. "Curious, my lord," he said, quietly. "There's a faint indentation at the clasp, as if it were forced, and inside, Whimsy took the locket, holding it up to the pale light filtering through the glass roof. Inside, instead of the expected photograph or lock of hair, was a scrap of paper, torn on one edge, inscribed with a single word in spidery, "Ink, sorry." He handed it back to Bunter with a slight frown. "What do you make of that, Bunter?" Bunter, loyal to the cause of understatement, merely said, "It's not a usual sentiment, my lord, for so private a token. And the handwriting appears tremulous. Female, I'd say. But the locket is older. A keepsake passed on." Whimsy nodded, tucking the locket into a handkerchief. "One does not apologize posthumously unless the living are meant to discover. Tell me, Doctor, any sign of poison?" Langley shook his head. "Nothing obvious, but I'll take a blood sample for analysis. I'd not wager on finding anything. Miss Charteris was, by all accounts, a healthy young woman. Physically, at least." At that moment the greenhouse door creaked, and Felix Braithwaite entered, shoulders hunched, the morning paper clutched in one hand. His hair was dishevelled, and his pale face bore the marks of sleeplessness. "Lord Peter," he said, in a voice brittle as frost, "are we to be subjected to a full inquisition? The constable is already pestering the staff, and my uncle is quite beside himself. I suppose you will want to ask what I was doing this morning." Whimsy, meeting the young man's gaze with bland affability, indicated a bench. "Why not sit? Down, Felix? It's a trying day for all concerned, and the more we understand, the sooner we can restore order to Braithwaite Hall. Tell me, were you acquainted with your cousin's habits? Did you see her this morning?" Felix hesitated, flicking a glance at the crumpled lilies on the work table. "She was always an early riser. I saw her from my window going down to the greenhouse. He paused, jaw tightening. "I didn't. Speak with her. We weren't on the best of terms, as I'm sure Mrs. Dalloway has told you." "Families are notorious for failing to harmonize," said Whimsy lightly. "But you were out before breakfast?" A flicker of irritation crossed Felix's face. "Yes, I walk before I work. It clears the mind. I was in the orchard. There's not much else to say. I saw William heading to the potting shed, and that was all. You're studying at Oxford, I believe. Forgive me, but it's a devilishly dull term to spend in the country. Did Miss Charteris have any visitors recently?" "Old friends, perhaps," Felix shook his head too quickly. "No, she was solitary, and a little, well, you know how it is, Lord Peter. A family black sheep is only welcome when there's a will to be read. She made enemies easily. Even in Australia there was always talk of quarrels." Whimsy let the silence draw out, watching Felix twist the edge of his newspaper. "And about the will, there was a quarrel." Felix's mouth twitched in a smile, too thin to be genuine. "Old Braithwaite's money is cursed, they say. I wouldn't know. My father's in trade and my prospects are modest. But Miss Charteris stood to inherit a good deal, unless she married without consent, in which case it would revert to the estate." "A matter for the lawyers, then," murmured Whimsy, "and the poets. Tell me, did you notice the greenhouse? Window open this morning?" Felix's head snapped up. "No, but the place is always stifling. She complained about the heat even in May. Sometimes she opened it herself. She said the orchids needed air, but I always thought she liked the danger. She had a taste for the Gothic, ghost stories, secret messages, melodrama." "Indeed, thank you, Felix. One last thing. The locket. Did you ever see her wear it?" Felix blinked. "Once or twice. She said it was a family piece, but she kept it hidden. I thought she was sentimental, but I suppose—" He shrugged, letting the sentence drift into silence. When Felix had gone, Whimsy stood very still, hands in his pockets, surveying the greenhouse as if it were an elaborate puzzle box. Bunter waited with a patient gravity, the locket and its word of apology between them. "A staged scene, Bunter," Whimsy mused at last. "The window, the locket, the apologetic note, almost theatrical, don't you think? But there are gaps in the drama. No one seems to have entered or left, yet something is amiss with the chronology. I wonder—" He knelt, brushing aside the scattered soil near the broken pot. "Observe, the moss is crushed here, and again, just under the open window. 2 sets of marks, one heavier than the other, and footprints in the damp. William's boots most likely, but another, smaller and less distinct. Miss Charteris's, Bunter inquired. Whimsy shook his head. I think not. Too large for her, and yet not quite matching any of the staff's shoes, if the hall's supply of Wellington boots is to be trusted. A faint, persistent draught traced through the open window. Whimsy straightened, catching the scent of something acrid, sharper than peat, hidden under the greenhouse's humid sweetness. He glanced at Bunter. Someone else was here, Bunter. Someone with a key or a knack for getting in unseen. There's a story tangled in these vines, and it's not yet willing to be told. And with that, as the constable's voice echoed distantly through the garden, demanding statements, order, sense, Whimsy and Bunter stepped out into the light, both knowing the true shape of this English tragedy was only beginning to emerge from the misted glass and meticulous lies. Whimsy paused just beyond the greenhouse door, blinking in the watery sun, his gaze moving restlessly from the trimmed yew hedges to the distant silhouette of Braithwaite Hall, stately and complacent, as if wholly untroubled by mortal disorder. The constable, Sergeant Herrick, a florid man whose boots alone seemed determined to obliterate evidence, was rounding up the household in the breakfast room, a process that had already produced murmurs and muffled protests from the assembled company. Whimsy made his way across the gravel, Bunter in step behind, the locket and its enigmatic message now wrapped and secreted in an inner pocket. Inside, the air was thick with unease, and Mrs. Harrow, the cook, wielded her apron as a kind of shield against the rising tide of scandal. Felix lingered in the corner with the affected nonchalance of youth, forced to participate in a family melodrama, while old Mr. Braithwaite, a relic of stiffer eras, sat rigidly in his chair, one gnarled hand closed around his walking stick as though it were a scepter. Herrick looked up as Whimsy entered, relief mingling with a species of deference. Lord Peter, if you'd be so kind, sir. I've taken names and whereabouts. Not a soul saw anything out of the ordinary, so they say. Miss Charteris was alone. Young William and Mrs. Dalloway have given their accounts. Cook was in the kitchen. Felix here in the orchard. Old Mr. Braithwaite abed with his nerves. Whimsy smiled gently. A bed with one's nerves is the safest place these days. Still, I find that the ordinary often disguises the extraordinary, especially in country houses. Might I have a few minutes alone with the family? I have a weakness for drawing-room confessions, though one rarely encounters the full melodrama outside of Wilkie Collins. Herrick, mollified, withdrew, boots clomping, leaving a faint trail of indignation on the runner. The family looked to Whimsy, expectant and wary. Let us begin with the morning itself, Whimsy said, voice light, almost chatty. Miss Charteris rose early, as was her habit. Mrs. Harrow, did you notice anything particular at breakfast? Mrs. Harrow sniffed. She wasn't herself, my lord, not since the letter. Didn't eat her porridge, left her tea pale too. I thought it was the weather. She asked for a fresh pot, then barely touched it. What letter was this? Whimsy's voice was mild, but the room stilled. Mr. Braithwaite interjected, his voice brittle. Some fool thing from Australia. Arrived yesterday's post, no return address. She took it up to her room straight away, wouldn't say a word. When she came down she was, well, altered. Felix gave a low whistle. She's always getting letters from those colonial friends. Perhaps it was nothing. But she did seem anxious last night. I thought it was only the will. She'd been... He faltered, aware of his grandfather's glare. Whimsy steepled his fingers, considering. Well, yes, much discussed, I gather. Miss Charteris stood to inherit the main portion, unless she married without family approval. Had there been talk of marriage, Mrs. Dalloway, summoned from the corridor by the merest flick of Whimsy's glance, spoke up, her manner brisk. Not that we knew, my lord. She was private, that one. But I saw her slip a photograph into her drawer last week. Some man, I think. Too dark to see clearly. A secret suitor and a troubling letter, Whimsy mused. A pity we cannot. Question the postmark. He turned to Felix. Did you see her last night? Felix shrugged. Briefly. She said nothing to me. She'd been reading in the study, then took a walk in the grounds, said she needed air. We crossed paths by the old sundial about 10:30. She was distracted, barely said good night. And this morning you saw her. From the orchard? Yes. She moved quickly, almost as if someone were following, but when I looked there was no one. Did you see the window open or anyone else about? No, just the mist rising over the lawn. It was very still. Only the crows making a racket in the limes. Whimsy allowed silence to settle, watching the interplay of nerves and suspicion. "Bunter, if you would be so kind, fetch Miss Charteris's keys and see if her room is in order. And perhaps that letter, if it's still to be found." Bunter nodded and slipped away. Whimsy turned back to the cook. "Mrs. Harrow, was there anything unusual in the kitchen this morning? Any strangers at the back door, or missing food?" She bristled, but pride and curiosity prevailed. "No strangers, sir, nor any food missing save a slice of bread I meant for the birds. The milkman left the bottles as always. Nothing amiss there." Whimsy thanked her and glanced at Mr. Braithwaite. "Forgive me, sir, but had Miss Charteris spoken of returning to Australia?" Mr. Braithwaite shook his head, but the movement was small and tremulous. No, she never would. She belonged. Here, whatever she said, but that country. She brought its shadows with her, always looking over her shoulder as if something might follow. At that moment, Bunter reappeared, silent as always, and handed Whimsy a sealed envelope and a key. "Ring. Miss Charteris's room is undisturbed, my lord. The letter was in her drawer beside a photograph of a man in uniform, naval, I believe. The letter is unsigned, but the handwriting is similar to the note in the locket." Whimsy opened the envelope with care. The contents were brief and tremulous, lines running into each other, a kind of desperate haste in the script. "You must not trust anyone, not even those closest. I am so sorry for what I did. It is not over. Please forgive me. If anything happens, look in the greenhouse. S." He handed the letter to Felix, who paled as he read it. "She never showed this to me," he whispered. "Who is S?" "She had a friend in Sydney, Sarah Munro, but she died last year. Perhaps not so dead as all that," Whimsy murmured. But his mind was elsewhere, drawing connections. Letter, locket, open window, the peculiar marks in the moss. And the photograph? Bunter produced it. A young man, severe. In his naval dress, his face unfamiliar but the background unmistakably English. Braithwaite Hall itself seen over one shoulder. "Did Miss Charteris speak of this man?" Whimsy asked quietly. Felix studied the image. "No, I've never seen him. Perhaps one of her old suitors or someone from Australia. She was secretive, liked a touch of drama. Was there ever any trouble? Quarrels, threats, odd visitors?" Whimsy pressed gently. Felix hesitated. "There was a man. Came by in March, asked for her, left his card. She refused to see him. Mrs. Dalloway was furious, said he looked like a tramp. She would never say who he was, but she was nervous afterwards." Whimsy nodded, his mind already spinning new patterns. "Thank you. Bunter, take the letter and photograph to Dr. Langley. Ask if he can identify the handwriting or the man in the picture. As for the locket, have it examined for prints, quietly, if you please." He rose, feeling the weight of many eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, I shall need to speak with you all again. There are, I fear, layers beneath the surface here, roots entwined far deeper than we have yet glimpsed. Please remain at hand. If anyone remembers the smallest detail, a sound, in the night, an unfamiliar face, do let me know." As Whimsy stepped into the hall, the grandfather clock tolled the quarter. He paused, listening to its hollow chime, and let his gaze drift to the window overlooking the greenhouse, where mist was now gathering anew, thick as secrets. Bunter joined him, his expression grave. A stage scene, a warning in the letter, an apology in the locket, and the impression that someone, or something, still watches from the shadows, Whimsy murmured. "It is not death that haunts this house, Bunter, but guilt. And guilt, as we both know, is far more persistent." The two men stood silent a moment longer, the weight of unspoken histories pressing in around them, as the investigation pressed inevitably forward, every answer birthing a fresh and thornier question. Whimsy stood in the dusky hall, the echoes of the grandfather clock trailing behind him like the memory of an old quarrel. He let the gravity of the morning settle, then strode toward the study, where the family papers lived in elaborate disorder. Bunter moved ahead, his steps soundless, the photograph and letter entrusted to his care. The study, when Whimsy entered it, was a room haunted by the minor ghosts of unfinished correspondence. and dog-eared volumes, an environment where secrets lingered in paperweights and dust. He sat at the broad walnut desk, the letter before him, and let his mind work in the quietly mechanical way it had learned from years of puzzles and people, charting not just what was said, but what was studiously omitted. Bunter returned within minutes, shutting the door behind him with unobtrusive delicacy. Dr. Langley will examine the letter and photograph. He notes, my lord, that the ink in the locket's note and the letter appear to be the same, though he cannot yet confirm the handwriting. He is also of the opinion that the bruise on Miss Charteris's wrist was recent, perhaps within the last hour of her life. The constable awaits your word, and there is a gentleman at the door. Local, rather unkempt, insists he must speak to someone in charge. I took the liberty of showing him into the morning room. Wimsey smiled. You are a jewel among men, Bunter. Tell Sergeant Herrick I will see him shortly, but first, let us pay our respects to this unexpected visitor. Unkempt men bearing secrets are often more interesting than housemaids bearing alibis. He stood tucking the letter into his pocket, and together they crossed the corridor. The morning room, long since stripped of its original function, was now little more than a holding area for muddied boots and the detritus of country life. In it sat a man of indeterminate age, hair matted, hands rough, a battered satchel in his lap. He rose as they entered, eyes darting from Wimsey to Bunter and back, as if still not wholly certain whether he was the hunter or the hunted. Good morning, Wimsey said, tone perfectly balanced between cordial and cool. I'm Lord Peter Wimsey. You wish to see me? The man twisted his cap between his fingers. Name's Cockerill, sir. Used to do odd jobs round here. It's about Miss Charteris, I heard. I thought I ought to say I saw something this morning. Didn't seem right to keep it to myself, not now. Wimsey nodded, indicating a chair. I find confessions sit better with a cushion, Mr. Cockerill. Please go on. Cockerill sat uneasily. I was down by the stables a bit before 9. Lost my watch, see? Thought I'd dropped it there last week. Well, I was looking, and I saw Miss Charteris heading toward the greenhouse. She had her hat on, red, I remember that, but she wasn't alone. Wimsey's attention sharpened. Who was with her? Cockerill shook his head. Didn't see clear, sir. Someone came out from the back of the greenhouse. Could have been one of the staff, or maybe a visitor. Tall, wearing a dark coat. Miss Charteris stopped, like she was surprised. They talked a minute, looked heated. Then the other person went inside and she followed. I thought nothing of it. Wasn't my place. But when I heard, well, you know. Did you see the face at all? No, sir, too far. But the coat looked almost like a man's raincoat, dark grey or black. Didn't belong to any of the lads that work here. Wimsey nodded, mind already assembling possibilities. Did you see anyone leave? No, sir. By then I'd found my watch and was off. That's all I know. You did well to come, Mr. Cockerill. If you think of anything more, no matter. How trivial. Send word. And please keep this conversation between ourselves for the moment. The man nodded, relieved, and left, leaving behind a vague scent of wet wool and anxiety. When the door closed, Wimsey turned to Bunter. That complicates the timetable, Bunter. If Miss Charteris was seen alive at 9, in the company of someone unaccounted for, then our cast of suspects is suddenly both expanded and more interesting. Bunter inclined his head. A visitor's presence is easily overlooked, my lord, if one knows how to enter and depart without attracting notice. The open window, perhaps, or a key. But the coat, none of the staff are so attired, and Felix would not risk so public an argument. He prefers his tragedies internalized. Wimsey crossed to the window, looking out toward the drive. Let us see if the family have anything to say about mysterious visitors. First, though, I will speak with Sergeant Herrick. Herrick, summoned, arrived with a notebook already bristling with defensive annotations. Lord Peter, I must insist. Procedure, interviews. Sergeant, if you would oblige me by reviewing the names of all household and ground staff, and if any are absent or recently dismissed. And ask the milkman and postman if they saw anyone unusual, tall, dark coat this morning or last night, discreetly if possible. As for the greenhouse, keep it secured, but instruct no one to touch the open window or the moss near the pots. We may need impressions. Herrick, half annoyed, half gratified, went about his duties, leaving Wimsey to return to the family. In the breakfast room, Felix was standing by the window, arms folded, staring out at the mist. Mr. Braithwaite dozed in his chair, and Mrs. Harrow was folding napkins with the grim determination of someone hoping to will the world back into order. Whimsy approached Felix quietly. "Did you notice anyone else about this morning? A stranger, a figure in a dark coat?" Felix started. "No, just William in the potting shed and Cockerill poking about the stables." "Why?" "Cockerill saw someone with your cousin. A tall figure, dark coat, at the greenhouse shortly before she died." Felix frowned, uncertain. Could have been one of the staff, but no, I didn't see anyone. Whimsy studied him, then glanced at Mrs. Dalloway, just entering with a sheaf of linen. "Mrs. Dalloway, did any of the staff wear a dark coat this morning?" She shook her head. "Only Mr. Braithwaite's old raincoat by the back door, my lord, and that hasn't been worn since last winter. None of the boys have coats like that. Miss Charteris, she had a navy blue cloak, but that's still hanging in her wardrobe." Whimsy thanked her and turned to Bunter. "Let us examine the wardrobe and check the cloak. Then perhaps a word with William. He may have seen more than he realizes." Upstairs, in the victim's room, Whimsy examined the navy cloak. Soft, perfumed, faintly but dry and undisturbed. No signs it had been worn. He noted other garments, searching for anything out of place, but the drawers were as neat as a ship's locker. He opened the wardrobe door wider and paused, fingers brushing the edge of a suitcase tucked at the back. It was locked. "Curious, Bunter. A locked case. Find the key among the ring." Bunter selected a small brass key, which turned with a faint click. Inside, neatly packed, were women's garments, a sheaf of letters tied in blue ribbon, and at the bottom, a man's black raincoat, mud on the hem. Whimsy drew it out, examining it carefully. "Well, well, and what story do you tell, my friend?" He slipped a hand into the pocket and withdrew a slip of paper. On it, in the same spidery hand as before, a line. "If you find this, it's too late." "Forgive me." He exchanged a glance with Bunter, who said, "A visitor who leaves his coat behind is not the usual sort, my lord." "Indeed not. Unless, of course, the coat was meant to be left for someone to find or to confuse the issue. And now, Bunter, let us see what William knows about early morning visitors. This house, I fear, is far from done with its secrets." He left the room, the coat folded over his arm, as outside the mist grew thicker still, and the ancient clock below told the hour, a hollow sound marking the passage not only of time but of innocence, slipping away with every quiet revelation. Whimsy descended the staircase with the raincoat slung carelessly over his arm, Bunter at his side, their progress unhurried yet purposeful, a rhythm in counterpoint to the feverish anxiety quietly infecting every corner of Braithwaite Hall. The house felt taut as wire. Down the corridor, voices floated and stilled at their approach. Doors closed softly, servants dispersing like a flock, startled by a distant hawk. Outside, the mist pressed at the window panes, the world reduced to a circle of lawns and yew, intimate and inescapable. In the side yard near the potting shed, William hunched over a wheelbarrow, pretending great attention to a heap of compost. Whimsy hailed him, pitching his tone as if inviting the boy to share in some harmless mischief. "William, leave off for a moment, if you please. We have a thing or two to ask, and you strike me as a man not easily taken in by appearances." William straightened, wary, cap in hand. "Yes, my lord." Whimsy dangled the raincoat before him. "Ever seen this about the place? Black, heavy, mud on the hem, not yet dry." William's eyes darted to the coat and away again. "No, sir, not that I know. It's not one of ours. The lads all have brown or green, nothing so grand as that. Could it belong to a visitor, do you think? Or perhaps to someone who wished not to be recognized?" William chewed his lip. "Could be, sir. There was a man came by last week, late at night. Thought maybe he was after the hens, but he didn't go near the coops. Asked after Miss Charteris, but she'd gone up. I told him to come back by day, and he left down the lane, fast." Whimsy exchanged a glance with Bunter. "Tall fellow, was he? What colour hair?" William frowned, thinking. "Tall, yes. Couldn't say about the hair. Had a cap on and it was dark. Spoke rough. Australian, maybe. Or something close." Whimsy: "Let the silence draw out. If you see him again, you'll let us know. Tell no one else, not the staff, not the family. And if you remember anything else, however small, find Bunter or me." William nodded, eager now to be dismissed. Whimsy and Bunter moved away, the raincoat swinging like a metronome at Whimsy's side. As they returned toward the house, a figure stepped from beneath the old lime tree. Felix, shoulders hunched in the fog, a book clutched to his chest as though it might ward off the day's encroachments. "Lord Peter, may I have a word?" His tone was brittle, a shiver behind the bravado. Whimsy gestured for him to walk beside them. "Certainly, Felix. The fog brings out confidences, I find." Felix fell into step, voice low. "I thought you should know. I saw my cousin late last night." She was upset, almost frightened. She said she had to meet someone in the morning, that it couldn't wait, and that if anything happened, there was a letter for me. I didn't believe her. I thought it was nerves. She was always dramatic, but— He broke off, staring at the gravel. "Now she's dead, and I keep thinking I should have pressed her for more." Whimsy laid a hand lightly on the young man's arm. "We cannot always anticipate the shape of tragedy, Felix. If there is a letter, we must find it. Where did she keep such things?" "In her writing desk. There's a false back in the bottom drawer. She showed me once, years ago, in a fit of childish bravado. I doubt she'd have changed the habit." "Thank you. If you recall anything more, any argument, any visitor, any small detail, speak to me or Bunter. I would not have you carrying needless guilt." Felix nodded, his features raw with fatigue, and slipped away into the haze, leaving Whimsy and Bunter alone in the filtered, uncertain light. Back in Miss Charteris's bedroom, Whimsy moved to the writing desk. He knelt, fingers tracing the inside edge of the bottom drawer, finding at last a small notch. A section slid back with a whisper. Within, among a pressed spray of eucalyptus and a handful of old calling cards, was an envelope marked simply "Felix, Whimsy." He weighed it in his hand, considering whether to violate a confidence that death itself had rendered moot. He broke the seal. Inside were 2 pages, close written, lines sloping in haste and agitation. "Dearest Felix, if you find this, I am probably beyond your help, and I can only hope you will forgive me. There are things I have never told you, things that happened in Sydney, things I could not speak of even when we were children. There is someone who knows, someone who has threatened me. If anything happens, it will be because of what I did, not out of malice, but out of fear. The man with the raincoat, he called himself David Sharp, but I do not believe that is his real name. He said he would come for me if I tried to run. I think he followed me here. Do not trust him. He will seem friendly, but he is dangerous. I'm sorry I should have told you everything, but I thought I could handle it alone. If you love me as I know you do, forgive me and do not try to find him yourself. Let the police do their work. Burn this letter when you are done." Whimsy folded the letter, his face grave. So the raincoat finds its owner, David Sharp, or whoever he truly is, an extortionist, or something darker, pursuing her from one continent to another. The question is, did he make good on his threat, or did someone else seize the opportunity in the confusion he caused? Bunter, never one to interject unasked, ventured, "If he left the coat behind, my lord, it may have been to suggest his guilt, or to obscure someone else's." Quite so. There is always a risk in melodrama that the real culprit hides in the margins content to let suspicion fall elsewhere. He turned the coat over, examining every seam. In the lining, barely discernible, was a faint trace of powder, a granular residue, gritty and white. "Bunter, take a sample of this and give it to Dr. Langley. It may be nothing, or it may be the final key to the puzzle." As Bunter slipped away with his careful, unobtrusive stride, Whimsy returned to the window. On the lawn below, the police now methodically cordoned the greenhouse, their movements deliberate, as if by fencing off the scene they might contain the evil that had flowered there. Felix returned, eyes rimmed red, holding a slip of paper. "I found this tucked in one of Emily's poetry books," he said, voice ragged. "It's not her handwriting." Whimsy took the note. It read, "In angular script, we are not done. If you talk, the next death is yours, Emmys. D.S." He looked up, mind running down the well-worn grooves of logic and threat. "Bunter is right," he said, more to himself than anyone. "There is too Much theatre about all of this, but even theatre, Felix, requires a backstage, a place where the actors change masks. Let us see where Mr. Sharp has been hiding himself, and who has helped him play his part. As the house fell into that hush peculiar to waiting and dread, Whimsy felt the shape of the answer drawing closer, somewhere amid the shifting shadows and the secrets preserved behind glass and bone and British good manners, brittle as sugar, and twice as easily shattered. Whimsy stood a moment at the window, the slip of anonymous threat still held lightly between his fingers, as if the ink might smudge and reveal its secret with time and patience. Outside, the mist pressed close, swallowing outlines, smoothing the landscape into one shifting, uncertain expanse. Below, police officers traced careful patterns around the greenhouse, while Bunter returned across the lawn, his stride marked with subtle purpose. Felix lingered near the writing desk, hands stuffed into his pockets, gaze fixed and unseeing. The note, its menace stark against the white paper, had clearly unsettled him. Whimsy observed him in the glass, as one might regard an actor waiting for his cue, then turned as Bunter entered, discreet as always. "My lord," Bunter said, producing a handkerchief-wrapped envelope. "Dr. Langley has taken the powder for analysis and will send word as soon as he can. He also wondered if you wished to examine the victim's effects, her purse, the contents of her pockets. They've been left untouched." "An admirable bit of restraint for the local constabulary," Whimsy replied. "And yes, Bunter, let us have a look. The smallest coin, the most casual trinket, may yet sing an aria before the curtain falls." He ushered Felix into a chair. "Rest here for a moment, my dear fellow. If the housemaid brings tea, let her fuss over you. She will, regardless." He softened the instruction with a smile, and Felix, grateful for the reprieve, sank down, his composure not quite restored. Together, Whimsy and Bunter crossed the corridor to the small, airless study where Miss Charteris's possessions had been gathered. A modest purse, a handkerchief edged with blue, a copy of Wuthering Heights folded open at the death of Catherine, and a slender gold pencil, its tip slightly blunted. Whimsy sorted through these with a collector's delicacy. In the purse, beyond a little money and a faded railway ticket, he found a tightly folded letter, this one addressed to E. Charteris, Braithwaite Hall, postmarked from London, and written in the same sharp, cramped hand as the threat to Felix. He read it in silence. "Emily, you know what I want. The truth. I am not patient, and your time is up. Come alone, or everyone will know. If you try to run, there will be consequences. D.S. Whimsy's." Brow furrowed, though he allowed no hint of satisfaction to colour his features. "Our friend D.S. is nothing if not persistent. This was posted 2 days ago, likely arrived yesterday. The net was closing." He set the letter aside, leafing through the remaining items. In the book's pages, he found another slip. This time, a pressed violet and a few penciled lines of verse not in Emily's hand. "In gardens green where secrets lie, beware the glass, beware the sky. The watcher waits with shadowed breath. The orchid blooms, the fruit is death." Whimsy raised an eyebrow. "Bunter, what do you make of a poetical blackmailer? Not content merely to threaten, he leaves clues in rhyme. Possibly the sign of a romantic temperament, my lord, or a mind inclined to misdirection, or both." He replaced the poem and turned the gold pencil between his fingers. The initials engraved were not those of Miss Charteris, but an unfamiliar A.C. Whimsy looked at Bunter. "Find out from Mrs. Dalloway if these belong to someone else, and make discreet inquiries. Did Miss Charteris entertain visitors from London recently? The railway ticket is from Paddington. Our circle of suspects now stretches from here to the city, and I'd wager will not stop at the county line." Bunter, receiving his instructions with the unruffled efficiency that made him indispensable, departed. Whimsy sat a moment, turning, the evidence over in his mind, assembling a portrait of fear, secrecy, and compulsion. The blackmail, the letters, the meeting, the coat left behind, the open window. The narrative had all the trappings of melodrama, yet beneath it was the patient, stifling logic of guilt and necessity. He heard a quiet tap and looked up to see Mrs. Dalloway in the doorway, anxiety making her voice thin and breathless. "My lord, there's a man at the gate. Stranger says he's here for Miss Charteris, refuses to give his name, but says he'll wait as long as it takes. Wimsey stood. Let him wait, by all means. In the meantime, offer him tea and keep an eye on his manners. If he is our Mr. Sharp or DS, he'll grow impatient. I'll speak to him when we're ready. He returned to Felix, who had been joined by Mrs. Harrow, the cook, plying him with biscuits and a sort of gruff maternal concern. Wimsey sat down, lowering his voice so only Felix could hear. Felix, did your cousin ever mention a friend or acquaintance with the initials AC? Someone who gave her a gold pencil? Felix shook his head. No one I can think of. She was always secretive about her friends, said it was safer that way. But there was a girl in Sydney, Alice Carmichael, I think. They were close for a while, then quarrelled. Emily wouldn't say why. Did Alice come to England? Felix hesitated. Not that I know. But Emily did receive a few letters from Australia. Burned most of them. I saw her crying over one, but she tore it up. Wimsey nodded, mind already filing this away, ready to test against whatever Bunter's inquiries might yield. He waited, letting the house's uneasy hush wash over him before rising and making his way to the hall. The stranger stood by the gate, hands thrust in his pockets, hat pulled low. Wimsey approached with the air of one greeting an old acquaintance. "Good morning," he said, his tone soft but iron beneath. "I understand you wish to see Miss Charteris. I regret to say she is unavailable." The man glanced up, his face lean and sharp, mouth twisted in a sardonic half-smile. "She would be. I told her it had come to this." His accent was Australian, rough and sanded. "Mr. Sharp, I presume?" The smile tightened. "Names don't matter. She had her chance. I only want what's mine." "And what is that?" "Our letter? She knows which. Without it, I'm done. With it, well, I disappear." Wimsey studied him. "Miss Charteris is dead, Mr. Sharp. Murdered. The police will want to ask you questions." Sharp paled, jaw flexing. But he mastered himself. Quickly. "She's dead. No, she was too careful. Always afraid of me, of herself. I didn't kill her. I wanted her alive." "That may be, but you were seen with her this morning near the greenhouse, and your raincoat was found in her room." Sharp's expression twisted. Pain or fury, it was difficult to tell. "She left it for me. Said she'd give me the letter in exchange for my silence. I waited, but she never came. You threatened her life. I threatened the truth. I'm no killer, Lord Peter. You must believe me." Wimsey regarded him, weighing sincerity against necessity. "You'd best come inside, Mr. Sharp. The police will wish to hear your story, and so will I. But know this. Someone in this house is not what they seem, and the answers may be closer than you expect." Sharp hesitated, then followed Wimsey. Up the drive, the mist closing behind them, leaving the world smaller and more secret still. The game had entered its final act, and every mask was beginning at last to slip. Wimsey guided Sharp up the gravel drive, the man's uneven stride betraying nerves poorly concealed beneath a crust of bravado. As they passed the clipped laurel and silent statuary, it occurred to Wimsey that so much of country life depended on the constant rehearsal of normality, a trait both its greatest defense and, in times like these, its most glaring weakness. The mist had grown denser, muffling their footsteps, softening the world into something private and uncertain. Bunter waited at the threshold, impassive as ever, ushering Sharp inside with the faintest inclination of his head. Wimsey directed them to the library, shutting the door with deliberate quiet. The room's shadows were familiar now, as if every crease in the leather armchairs and glint of mahogany were attuned to the presence of secrets. Sharp glanced round, taking the measure of Wimsey's world, then perched on the edge of a chair. His hat still in his hands, knuckles white on the brim. Bunter busied himself at the sideboard pouring tea, an act so conventionally English that it only heightened the sense of the extraordinary. Wimsey accepted a cup, gestured Sharp to do the same, and then sat opposite, crossing his legs with casual precision. "Now, Mr. Sharp, or shall I say DS, you came to Braithwaite Hall with the intention of meeting Miss Charteris to retrieve a letter you say she withheld. You were seen on the grounds this morning wearing a raincoat that is now in police possession. Before we go further, you should know that I value the truth over theatrics and that the constable will join us shortly. If you are innocent, This is the moment to be clear. Sharp's gaze flickered. He set his hat aside, drawing breath as if for a plunge. I'll tell you what I can. Emily, Miss Charteris, owed me the truth. Back in Sydney there was an accident. Her friend Alice Carmichael, died under suspicious circumstances. Emily was there. So was I, though not by choice. Alice was blackmailing both of us over something that happened when we were all in Darwin. Nothing criminal, just the kind of secret that ruins families if it gets out. Alice fell from a balcony. The police said accident, but Emily blamed herself. She thought someone pushed Alice, maybe even me. She ran, changed her name for a time. When I tracked her down, she was here. He paused, voice roughened by the memory. I never threatened her. Not really. I only wanted what Alice left behind. A letter she'd written to Emily, naming me as the culprit. It wasn't true. I begged Emily to destroy it, but she wouldn't. She said she was keeping it as protection in case I turned on her. I sent those notes, yes, I admit it. But I never laid a finger on her. I arrived last night, slept rough in the woods. This morning we were supposed to meet in the greenhouse. She never showed. Whimsy's fingers drummed lightly on his knee. You say you waited for her in the greenhouse. Did you see anyone else approach? Sharp frowned, searching memory. No one came while I was there. I heard someone, maybe Felix, walking the orchard. When I realized Emily wasn't coming, I left. She'd left my raincoat in her room. I thought it was a peace offering, or a way of telling me to go. I didn't go back inside, I swear it. Whimsy watched him for a long moment, measuring the texture of fear against the performance of innocence. He knew well enough that guilt could sound like confusion, and that the simplest lies wore the cloak of sincerity. Felix says he saw Emily late last night and that she seemed frightened. Did she speak to you? Sharp shook his head. I saw her in the dusk, but she wouldn't come near me. She said, "It ends tomorrow," and left. I never saw her alive again. At that, the door opened and Sergeant Herrick entered, boots squeaking apologetically on the Turkish rug. He eyed Sharp, took in the set of Whimsy's shoulders and folded his arms with official patience. Lord Peter, Dr. Langley sent word. The white powder in the coat is digitalis. Foxglove, sir. Enough, he says, to kill a dozen people if taken pure. He's certain it's what finished Miss Charteris. Sharp's head jerked up. Digitalis? She was terrified of drugs, would never have touched the stuff. Whimsy inclined his head. And yet it was found in the lining of your coat, which she had in her possession. A coincidence or a plant, no pun intended, by some more cunning hand. Tell me, Mr. Sharp, did you ever see Emily handle the coat? Did you lend it to anyone? Sharp shook his head helplessly. No, she borrowed it once in Sydney, but not since. She hated the smell. Herrick, sensing his moment, interjected, You'll need to come with me, sir. There's more to sort out, and the coroner's due tomorrow. Sharp rose, stiff, with resentment, but did not protest. As he left, Whimsy caught Bunter's eye, a silent conversation passing between them. This was too neat, too pat. There was theatre here, yes, but the real playwright remained in the shadows. When the door had closed behind them, Whimsy sat back, reviewing the landscape of the case. Alice Carmichael, the true origin of the secret, letters and threats, a meeting. Set for the greenhouse, a raincoat left behind. Digitalis introduced by whom? Emily's own words from her last letter echoed in his mind. Do not trust anyone, not even those closest. He called for Felix, who arrived pale but steadier, an aura of tension tightening his movements. Whimsy spoke gently. Felix, I must ask, did your cousin ever show any interest in botany or in poisonous plants? Felix shook his head. Not beyond orchids and ferns. She hated foxglove, said it reminded her of funerals. And the gardeners. Did anyone on staff know more about such things than they should? Felix hesitated. William, the undergardener, he's been odd lately, very nervous. Came back one night muddy and shivering. Wouldn't say where he'd been. Whimsy rose, thanking Felix, and sent Bunter to fetch William. The boy arrived, hat in hand, eyes darting everywhere but Whimsy's face. William, Whimsy said quietly, I need the truth. Digitalis was found in Mr. Sharp's coat, but I do not think he placed it there, did you? William's face crumpled. No, my lord. but I saw someone in the greenhouse after Miss Charteris went in. It was Mrs. Dalloway. She was crying, and she had a little bottle in her hand. I didn't know what to do. I was scared." Wimsey let out a long breath, the logic falling into place at last. "How you did right to say nothing until now. Was she alone?" William nodded. "Yes, sir. Then she left by the side door, and I heard Miss Charteris cry out. When I went in, it was too late. I ran." Wimsey dismissed the trembling boy and summoned, "Bunter, fetch Mrs. Dalloway quietly." In moments the housekeeper entered, her mask of propriety worn thin. Wimsey's tone was gentle, almost regretful. "Mrs. Dalloway, Emily Charteris is dead, poisoned with digitalis. You were seen in the greenhouse, in tears, with a bottle in your hand. Tell me, why?" She sagged, the strength gone from her. "She wasn't kind, my lord. She threatened me. Said she'd turn me out after all these years if I didn't do as she asked. She wanted me to fetch a tonic from the cupboard. She said she needed it for her nerves. I thought it was only valerian. I swear it. She mixed it herself. I never knew." Wimsey watched her, the flicker of pity in his eyes shadowed by certainty. "And the rest? The threats, the letters?" Mrs. Dalloway shook her head, weeping. "I know nothing of that, my lord. I only wanted to keep my place. She promised no harm would come." Wimsey nodded, understanding at last how the story had grown so twisted. A housekeeper driven by fear and misplaced loyalty, a blackmailer haunted by his own past, and at the heart of it all, a frightened woman trying to keep her secrets buried in the greenhouse's humid, watching silence. The investigation, it seemed, had at last touched the deepest root, though the question of who truly killed Emily Charteris was not quite settled. As dusk thickened and the house prepared for a night of uneasy sleep, Wimsey sat alone in the library, the puzzle nearly finished, every piece heavy with the weight of what must, inevitably, be revealed. Evening descended over Braithwaite Hall, in slow violet shrouds, the house growing still save for the occasional creak of ancient timbers, settling as if under the weight of accumulated secrets. Wimsey sat in the library, a lamp burning low, sifting through his notes and statements as a priest might finger a rosary, each name and moment counted and recounted, seeking not redemption, but order from chaos. Outside, the fog thickened, flattening the garden into a realm of uncertain edges. Somewhere a clock struck 8, muffled by the weather, and in the silence that followed, Wimsey found his mind tracing every thread that wound through the day. Mrs. Dalloway's trembling confession, Sharp's tangled past, Felix's haunted, loyalty, and William's glimpse of tragedy. Each character shrouded by their own burden, every alibi half misted by fear or shame. He stood and moved to the window, pressing a hand to the cold glass. Beyond the murky lawn, the greenhouse glimmered faintly, its panes beaded with condensation, lamplight within throwing out a spectral glow. He recalled the pressed violet and the verses, the coded warnings, the persistent question. Had Emily Charteris been murdered by the living hand of vengeance, or by the relentless pressure of fear, guilt, and fate, each playing its part in a perfect storm? A faint knock sounded. Bunter entered, bearing a tray with a cup of coffee and a folded paper. "Dr. Langley's final report, my lord." "And, Sergeant?" "Herrick is waiting in the study." "Thank you, Bunter. Sit down a moment, will you?" Bunter took the opposite chair, dignified and patient. Wimsey unfolded the paper. "Digitalis, yes, not an accidental dose. Mixed in a solution, and added, it seems, to a cup of tea found half-finished in the greenhouse. Miss Charteris's fingerprints, on the handle and rim. None on the bottle, only Mrs. Dalloway's. No fingerprints at all on the threatening letters. It appears, Bunter, we have been played upon by a master hand. The blackmail, the coat, the planted evidence, all arranged for maximum confusion." Bunter inclined his head. "It is a very tidy puzzle, my lord, but perhaps too tidy." "Indeed." "Consider, Mrs. Dalloway, out of loyalty and fear, provides the means. Sharp supplies the plausible threat. The letters and notes ensure suspicion swirls everywhere except where it ought. The question is, who understood the true nature of the trap and exploited it?" Wimsey thought aloud. Emily wanted protection but also control. She manipulated Mrs. Dalloway, perhaps even Sharp, to keep her enemies near and herself in command. But who stood to gain by her death? The will. Felix? Yet Felix has no access to the digitalis or the means to arrange so complex a web. Bunter was silent, considering. Whimsy's mind darted back to the pressed violet, the poem, the gold pencil, AC, the friend in Sydney who died, the claim that Alice Carmichael was dead. But what if Alice never died? Or what if someone else with knowledge of those events had come to England under another name? A flicker of suspicion lit. He reached for the letters, reading the lines of verse, then the handwriting in the latest. Threat. The script, though disguised, bore a resemblance to the careful schoolroom hand in an old photograph of Emily and Alice, tucked into the bottom of the suitcase. He rose abruptly. Bunter, summon Mrs. Harrow, please. Quietly. Within moments the cook entered, flushed from the heat of her kitchen. Whimsy gestured her into a seat, offering reassurance. Mrs. Harrow, you were with Miss Charteris in Australia, were you not? You came back with her after her mother's death. Mrs. Harrow's eyes flickered, a shadow crossing her face. Yes, my lord, I was her nurse as a child, then her companion abroad. And you remember Alice Carmichael, I suppose? A muscle twitched in Mrs. Harrow's jaw. Miss Alice? Of course. Poor thing. But you see, Whimsy said gently, I believe you are Alice Carmichael. You did not die in Sydney. You changed your name and followed Miss Charteris here. A silence thick as fog. Mrs. Harrow's hands clutched her apron. Why would you think that? The handwriting in the threats is yours, poorly disguised, but not enough to fool the police if we press the matter. The gold pencil, AC, a keepsake. The references to the incident in Darwin, the constant presence at Emily's side, and your position in the house, so close you could see every movement, intercept every letter, and, if need be, doctor a cup of tea. Her composure frayed, tears welled. I didn't want to harm her. I only wanted her to confess. She let everyone believe I was dead to save herself from scandal. I lost everything, my name, my future. She was never the same after Sydney. I wrote the first letter in desperation, then the others, but I never meant for her to die. Whimsy's voice was soft, implacable. And yet, when Mrs. Dalloway brought the tonic, you had the means to add the digitalis. You counted on Emily's fear, her willingness to do anything to keep you silent. Your plan was blackmail, not murder. But when the chance arose, you let it happen. Didn't you, Alice? She hid her face in her hands. I didn't know what I was doing. I saw her with the bottle, crying, desperate. I only wanted her to beg me for forgiveness, not... She broke down, shoulders shaking. Whimsy waited, the weight of it heavy in the hush. At last, Bunter escorted Mrs. Harrow, Alice Carmichael, after all, away, the matter now for the authorities. In the quiet that followed, Whimsy let himself feel the chill that only comes at the end of a long day, when every human failing has been measured and found wanting. He watched the last of the mist dissolve from the glass of the greenhouse, where life and death and secrets alike flourished and withered under the same indifferent sun. He poured himself a last cup of coffee and raised it, half in salute, half in sorrow, to all those for whom the truth in the end proved too much to bear. The fire in the library had burned low, its red-gold embers casting long shadows over the shelves and across the Persian rug. Whimsy remained in his chair, unmoving, the last of the case still coiling through his mind like pipe smoke, visible for a moment, then gone. Somewhere beyond the walls, Bunter's quiet movements stirred the air. He would be arranging the day's notes, perhaps polishing a final pair of shoes, his silent efficiency giving shape to chaos. Whimsy tapped the rim of his teacup with one long finger, eyes half closed. The tragedy had concluded, or so it would seem. Alice Carmichael, Mrs. Harrow, was now under guard, her tearful confession sealed in ink and duty. But as always, something remained. Not quite a doubt, but a sense of incompletion, as though the final line of a sonnet had been left unwritten. He rose abruptly, walked to the desk and lit the lamp with an idle flick of the wrist. A small sheaf of notes lay waiting, Bunter's precise handwriting recording the timeline, the letters, the physical evidence, and the statements from each player in the unfortunate drama. He scanned the lines slowly, methodically, until his gaze stopped at one quiet, easily overlooked detail. Felix Braithwaite noted Emily had a habit of going to the greenhouse precisely at 9:30 after tea. On that day, William last saw her enter at 9:33. She was found at 10:10. Death estimated between 9:45 and 10. Wimsey's brow furrowed. He returned to the armchair, sitting now not with the weariness of a man who had finished a case, but with the energy of one who had just reopened it in his mind. The digitalis had come from the greenhouse. That much was clear. Foxglove was grown in the wild hedgerows at the edge of the property, and likely also among the less sentimental parts of the Braithwaite beds. Alice or Mrs. Harrow had motive, certainly. She'd faked her own death, followed Emily across oceans, and embedded herself into the household under a borrowed identity. The letters, the threats, even the poem, all hers, but not the murder. Not quite. The dosage, the delivery, it was clinical, exact, efficient. And Alice, from her own account, had acted on impulse, clumsily, blindly. She'd intended blackmail, not death. Yet the death had occurred anyway, and with a precision that bespoke calculation. The poison had been administered in a fresh cup of tea, poured no more than half an hour before Emily collapsed. Someone had known precisely when she would be, there precisely when she would drink. Someone who knew her habits intimately. Wimsey stood again, this time striding to the window. The mist had lifted at last, revealing the garden in cool moonlight. The greenhouse shimmered, ghost-like, glass panes glinting like knives. Beyond it, the orchard lay in soft, shifting shadow. And there, he caught a faint movement beneath the old sundial. He stepped back from the window and rang for Bunter. "My lord?" came the soft voice seconds later. "I believe we're not quite done after all," Wimsey said. "The play had one more act, left unwritten, or perhaps performed, in silence." "Is Felix still awake?" "I believe he is walking in the orchard, my lord." "Good. Let's take a turn with him, shall we?" They made their way quietly across the grounds, shoes whispering over damp grass, the scent of the earth sharp and fresh after the day's strange heat. Felix stood beneath the lime tree, gazing up at the stars, arms folded tightly, as if to hold something in or keep something out. He turned as they approached, and his face, when he saw Wimsey, was almost resigned. "You've come to arrest me?" he asked, voice too calm. "That depends," Wimsey said, "on what you say now." Felix didn't move. "I didn't poison her, not directly. But I knew. I knew she'd never give up the letter. I knew about Alice. Of course I did. She told me everything when she arrived, not knowing I'd recognized her from Sydney. I helped her get in. I thought perhaps she'd scare Emily into telling the truth." Wimsey said nothing. Felix went on, voice cracking slightly. "Emily destroyed people, not maliciously, just carelessly. She used secrets like currency. She never forgave Alice for being liked more, or for knowing what happened in Darwin. She used Mrs. Dalloway, she used me. She would have used Sharp too in time, I suppose. I hoped the confrontation would end it, that she'd confess or leave. I didn't expect her to die." "But you brought the tea," Wimsey said, quietly. Felix closed his eyes. "Yes, she asked for it just like every morning. And I hesitated. I knew Mrs. Dalloway had made it up from the kitchen, but I also knew Alice had been near the cups. I saw the bottle, small green glass. She dropped it the day before. I kept it. I could have warned her." He opened his eyes, "But I didn't." "You didn't add the poison yourself," Wimsey said slowly, "but you saw the storm coming, and you stepped aside." Felix nodded, his face pale in the moonlight. "Do what you must. I'm not proud of it. I loved her in my way. But she was dangerous. She made people into weapons." Wimsey was silent for a long time. Finally he said, "You won't be arrested." "Not today. Alice Carmichael has confessed. The law will see the intent in her hand, not in your inaction. But your soul, I fear, may not be so merciful." Felix didn't reply. He merely turned and began walking again, slowly into the dark edges of the orchard, where the trees whispered things to each other that men preferred not to hear. Back in the hall, Wimsey removed his overcoat and laid it on the stand. Bunter awaited him by the staircase, offering a fresh cup of tea. "Will there be anything more tonight, my lord?" Wimsey took the cup, his fingers warming against the porcelain. "No, Bunter. only the slow business of forgetting. And upstairs the wind shifted faintly through the shutters, and the garden settled once more into the semblance of peace, though the truth, like the foxglove, remained in the soil, waiting to bloom again. The following morning dawned with a brittle clarity, the sky an unblemished pale blue that seemed to mock the weight of the previous day's revelations. Wimsey found himself in the breakfast room before the household had quite gathered, the clatter of china and the low murmur of servants setting the scene for a day that promised neither rest nor easy answers. Bunter stood nearby, ever discreet, poised to intercept the inevitable questions and provide his usual silent support. Wimsey's thoughts drifted back to the orchard and the faint outline of Felix's solitary figure disappearing into the shadows, a young man burdened not with guilt alone but with the bitter inheritance of love, twisted into something unrecognizable. The boy's confession, partial, anguished, yet brutally honest, had cast a new light on the tragic tapestry woven at Braithwaite Hall. Not murder in the traditional sense, but an absence of intervention that bore a culpability no less profound. Sipped his tea thoughtfully, eyes catching the movement of Mrs. Dalloway as she entered, her face a mask of propriety carefully reconstructed, though the tremor in her hands betrayed the storm beneath. Wimsey inclined his head, acknowledging her presence. "Mrs. Dalloway, I trust you slept." "Fitfully, my lord," she replied, voice hushed, as if the walls might overhear. "There's talk among the staff. Some say the house is cursed. Others, whisper of secrets better left buried." "Secrets," Wimsey mused, "are like foxgloves, Mrs. Dalloway, beautiful and deadly, often growing hidden in plain sight. We have seen many blooms in the past days, but the roots run deep and tangled." She nodded slowly, the lines of exhaustion softening. "I only hope that the truth, when it comes, will bring peace and not further harm." Wimsey smiled faintly. "Peace is a rare visitor in these parts. But truth at least, allows. Just to know the shape of our grief and perhaps begin to bear it." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sergeant Herrick, brisk and officious, bearing the morning's dispatches. He approached Wimsey with the urgency of one keen to move proceedings along. "My lord, Dr. Langley has completed his examination of the greenhouse and the surrounding grounds. He has found traces of the digitalis in several cups, but only one contained a lethal dose. Others were diluted, possibly as a means to confuse or warn." Wimsey's brow lifted. A clever stratagem, if so. Poison administered not only as a weapon, but as a riddle. Herrick nodded. He also discovered footprints near the side door, smaller than William's boots. Dr. Langley believes the killer or accomplice may have been a woman. "Interesting," Wimsey said, steepling his fingers. "The plot thickens, Sergeant. And what of the letters? Any sign of forgery or concealment?" Herrick produced a set of documents. "We've compared the handwriting to known samples. Mrs. Harrow's is a match for the threatening notes, but there's an anomaly. One letter was postmarked from London on a day Mrs. Harrow was recorded here. Someone else sent it." Wimsey's eyes glinted with renewed interest. "Then our Mrs. Harrow is but one player, someone with access to the postal system and a mind for duplicity." Bunter entered quietly, bearing a telegram. Wimsey took it and unfolded the thin paper. His eyes scanned quickly. "An anonymous tip," he said, "from a Miss Beatrice Carmichael, claiming to be a relative of Alice Carmichael. She writes that Alice confided in her fears of betrayal and hinted at a third party who wished Emily dead. She requests we look into the household." Staff with renewed attention. Herrick pursed his lips. "That narrows the field considerably, my lord." Wimsey nodded. "Indeed, Sergeant. The evidence suggests a conspiracy, a web woven of desperation, jealousy, and long-held grudges. It is time we revisited the staff with this in mind." Mrs. Dalloway, overhearing, paled visibly but said nothing. Wimsey resolved to begin with the undergardener, William, whose nervous glances and half-spoken truths had hinted at knowledge deeper than he dared confess. William was summoned to the library, his face pale but determined, the coat he wore too large and the sleeves often slipping from his wrists. "My lad," Wimsey began gently, "I need you to tell me everything you know about this matter. Speak plainly, and know that the truth will always be your shield." The boy swallowed hard and began haltingly. I saw Mrs. Dalloway and Miss Harrow talking late one night by the potting shed. They seemed angry. I heard Mrs. Harrow say something about getting rid of her and no one being the wiser. I was frightened and ran. Wimsey exchanged a glance with Bunter, who was quietly noting every word. And did you tell anyone this at the time? No, my lord. I thought I might be wrong. But then I saw Mrs. Dalloway with a bottle the next day near the greenhouse. She was crying, but she wouldn't say why. Did you see anyone else? No, sir, but I heard voices, Mr. Felix arguing with Mrs. Harrow in the hall the evening before the death. They were shouting about money and threats. I didn't want to listen. Wimsey's eyes narrowed. Thank you, William, you've done well. As William left, Wimsey turned to Bunter. The picture is clearer now. There was collusion, even if unwitting on some parts. The motive: money, power, fear. Felix, too, Bunter added. He's been evasive, but his quarrel with Mrs. Harrow suggests something more than familial discord, Wimsey nodded. It appears the household is a stage upon which many masks have been worn. We must now unmask the principal players. He summoned Felix next, whose face bore the marks of restless nights and mounting dread. Felix, Wimsey said softly, it is time to lay all your cards on the table. The truth is the only currency with which we may buy peace. Felix's defiance cracked. I was desperate, my lord. I loved Emily in my own way, but I feared her. She threatened to disinherit me, to ruin me. I argued with Mrs. Harrow about it. I never meant for her to die. Wimsey listened, the pieces assembling into a coherent mosaic of human frailty and dark resolve. As the day drew on, the mystery yielded its last layers, exposing not a single villain, but a constellation of flawed souls entangled in a fatal dance. And when at last the truth was spoken aloud, quietly, inevitably, it was a confession of despair, regret, and the merciless consequences of secrets kept too long. Wimsey closed the final chapter with a sigh, aware that in the garden of human hearts, some foxgloves bloom with deadly beauty, and some truths once unearthed cannot be replanted. The drawing-room at Braithwaite Hall was draped in the softened amber of late afternoon, the fading sun casting long shadows that seemed to stretch like silent witnesses across the worn Persian carpets. Lord Peter Wimsey sat comfortably yet alert, a half-empty cup of tea resting upon the low table beside him. The assembled household, Felix Braithwaite, Mrs. Dalloway, Bunter, Sergeant Herrick, and even the visibly shaken William, had been gathered for what promised to be the final reckoning. The atmosphere was taut with restrained tension, each face an inscrutable mask, awaiting the unveiling of truths long buried beneath layers of fear, resentment, and love. Wimsey surveyed the group with a faint smile, the arch, lightly ironic tone that could so easily disarm suspicion, yet command attention. We have, I believe, traversed the tangled paths of Braithwaite Hall's recent sorrows, with more care than many would afford a garden's foxgloves, but it is time, as the poets say, to pluck the flower and look upon its heart. He let his gaze rest briefly on Mrs. Dalloway, who shifted uneasily before turning to Felix. Young Mr. Braithwaite, you have borne the burden of uncertainty and conflicted loyalties well. Your quarrel with Mrs. Harrow and your own regrets paint a portrait of a man caught between duty and despair. Tell us plainly, what transpired on the evening before Miss Charteris's death? Felix swallowed hard, then spoke steadily. I argued with Mrs. Harrow over the will and Miss Charteris's threats to disinherit me. I warned her that if she crossed Emily, there would be consequences, but I never intended for harm to come to her. Later that night, I saw Mrs. Dalloway near the greenhouse with a bottle. She was distraught. I approached her, but she refused to speak. And Mrs. Dalloway, Wimsey prompted gently, you have confessed to being in the greenhouse with a bottle in your hand, though you deny administering the poison. Pray explain the truth as you understand it. Mrs. Dalloway's eyes brimmed with tears, her voice trembling yet resolute. I loved Miss Charteris as one can love a tempest, fiercely, fearfully. She threatened me with dismissal, drove me to desperation. When she asked for the tonic, I thought it was harmless, only valerian for her nerves. I did not know the bottle contained digitalis. When she fell, I panicked and fled. Wimsey nodded slowly. Mrs. Harrow, your confession that you are Alice Carmichael, alive though long presumed dead, adds a layer of complexity to this tale. You followed Miss Charteris here to protect your own secrets, and in doing so, became entangled in the very fears you sought to conceal. Mrs. Harrow, once composed, now wept openly. I never wished her harm. I wanted her to admit the truth about Sydney, about Darwin, but fear made monsters of us all. Whimsy's gaze then fell upon William, whose youthful face bore the marks of fright and guilt. William, your observations about the late-night conversation and your sighting of Mrs. Dalloway with a bottle were crucial. Tell us, did you see anyone else around the greenhouse that night? The boy shook his head. No, my lord, only voices, raised voices from the hall. I was too scared to listen closely. Whimsy's expression was thoughtful. And Sergeant Herrick, the evidence from Dr. Langley confirms digitalis as the cause of death, administered with precise timing to coincide with Miss Charteris's habitual tea. The question remains, who had both the knowledge and opportunity to execute this plan so deftly? Herrick cleared his throat. My investigations suggest Mrs. Harrow was aided by someone within the household, someone with access to the poison, and intimate knowledge of Miss Charteris's routines. Whimsy's lips curled into a faint smile. Indeed, Sergeant. This brings us to a certain matter of timing and motive, and to a certain individual who has, until now, sat quietly in the shadows. He turned to Felix. Felix, have you any knowledge of the whereabouts of Mrs. Harrow on the morning of Miss Charteris's death? Felix looked down. I saw her leave the kitchen early, but I didn't question it. She seemed determined, almost desperate. Whimsy nodded and then addressed the room at large. It is clear that Mrs. Harrow, compelled by fear and old wounds, administered the poison unwittingly, relying on Mrs. Dalloway's unwitting complicity. Yet the plan required knowledge of the exact timing of Miss Charteris's tea, a detail known only to a few. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. That knowledge belonged to none other than Felix Braithwaite himself. You were present in the hall during those late-night exchanges, aware of tensions and threats, and yet chose silence. Felix's face paled, and he looked away. Whimsy continued, Your quarrel with Mrs. Harrow, your fear of disinheritance, and your close proximity to the household secrets place you at the fulcrum of this tragedy. You did not administer the poison, but your actions, or inactions, set the stage for its deadly success. Felix's voice broke. I did what? I thought necessary. I wanted her to leave, to confess, to end the torment. I never meant to kill her. Whimsy nodded. Intent and consequence are often strangers who meet in the corridors of human frailty. But it is time to accept responsibility. He turned finally to the others. Miss Charteris's death was the result of a convergence of secrets, fears, and fractured loyalties. Each participant played a part, whether by action or omission, in the delicate machinery of tragedy. Whimsy stood, his figure casting a long shadow. In the quiet that follows, we must remember that justice is not merely about punishment, but understanding. Let us honor Miss Charteris's memory by acknowledging the complexities of human nature that led us here. He offered a final glance. Around the room, eyes lingering on the faces softened by remorse and reflection. And now I shall take my leave, with the hope that Braithwaite Hall may find some measure of peace beneath its greenhouses and gardens, where foxgloves bloom and secrets fade like morning mist. The gathering dispersed quietly, each carrying the weight of the day's revelations. Whimsy, alone now, closed the door behind him and stepped into the fading light, his mind already turning to the next mystery, awaiting the sharp eye and steady hand of the gentleman detective. As Lord Peter Whimsy stepped into the cool evening air outside Braithwaite Hall, the gathering dusk wrapped the gardens in a softened shadow. The distant song of a nightingale rose above the gentle rustling of leaves, a reminder that life persisted even in the wake of sorrow and secrets unveiled. The house behind him stood solemn, its windows glowing faintly against the darkening sky, each pane a silent witness to the day's revelations. He paused for a moment, hands clasped behind his back, eyes tracing the intricate lattice of the greenhouse where the last chapter of this lament had unfolded. The fragile glass, streaked with dew, seemed to hold the ghosts of whispered conversations, of fears confessed too late, of trust betrayed by those closest. It was a fitting stage for such a tragedy, an environment where beauty and danger coexisted, and the thinnest veneer of civility masked turbulent emotions beneath. Whimsy allowed a slight smile to play upon his lips, not of mirth but of quiet acknowledgement. Such was the nature of the human heart, complex, sometimes cruel, but always fascinating to the patient observer. He turned from the glass house, the faint scent of foxglove lingering in the air, and began his measured walk toward the village, where the world beyond Braithwaite's walls awaited with its own mysteries. The path was familiar, lined with ancient oaks and soft moss underfoot, but tonight it felt different. Each step resonated with the echoes of lives touched by the day's events. The villagers, for all their gossip and suspicion, had been spared the full tempest. The household's troubles remained a tightly held secret, a fragile bloom preserved beneath layers of discretion and old-fashioned discretion. As he reached the village inn, a modest establishment with a warm hearth and the muted hum of evening conversation, Whimsy paused. The landlord recognized him and offered a respectful nod. Whimsy entered quietly, seeking a solitary corner where he might gather his thoughts and prepare for the inevitable return to London and the next enigma. Seated by the fire, he reflected upon the threads that had woven this particular tapestry, the fear and longing, the protective instincts that had become suffocating. The young man caught between love and loyalty, and the woman who had lived 2 lives yet could not escape the shadow of her past. The truth, as always, had been more nuanced than accusation or condemnation. It was a story of fractured souls, human failings, and the tragic consequences of secrets left to fester. Yet even as the case closed in his mind, Whimsy knew that the world was inexhaustible in its capacity for mystery. Each solved puzzle only revealed further complexities, each answer a new question in disguise. But for tonight, he allowed himself the luxury of quiet contemplation. The comfort of a well-earned rest before the dawn called him once more to the pursuit of justice cloaked in riddles. Outside, the night deepened, and the stars emerged one by one. Silent sentinels watching over the village and the distant halls of Braithwaite, where foxgloves bloomed still, beautiful, deadly, and forever entwined with the secrets of the heart. The candle flickered softly upon the mantelpiece as Whimsy reclined in the dim solitude of his chambers at the inn. The day's weight lay heavy upon him, not merely from the unravelled strands of Braithwaite Hall's tragedy, but from the eternal burden of human frailty he had witnessed once more. He allowed his gaze to drift toward the window, where the dark canopy of night was studded with stars, each a distant sentinel in the vastness, indifferent to the mortal dramas below. He mused on the curious nature of justice, that delicate balance between law and mercy, truth and compassion. Mrs. Harrow, the woman who had lived a second life as Alice Carmichael, now faced the consequences of deeds born from desperation and grief. Felix, caught in the web of family secrets and divided loyalties, bore his own private reckonings, and Miss Charteris herself, whose complex character had both hidden and revealed the myriad faces of fear, love and pride. A soft knock interrupted his reverie. Bunter entered, carrying a neatly folded telegram and an envelope, both marked with the official seals of the Metropolitan Police. Whimsy took the telegram first, scanning its terse contents. It was a request for his immediate presence at Scotland Yard. There was a matter requiring his particular expertise, a case that promised to be as tangled and intriguing as any he had encountered. He then opened the envelope, revealing a letter from Felix Braithwaite. The handwriting was tentative but clear. "Dear Lord Peter, thank you for your kindness and for seeing beyond my faults. I have resolved to leave Braithwaite Hall for a time, to seek clarity and perhaps redemption. I hope one day to return with the past behind me. Until then, I remain grateful for your understanding. Yours sincerely, Felix Braithwaite." Whimsy folded the letter thoughtfully. It was a sign that, amidst the ruin, some fragile hope endured. He stood, straightening his jacket. "Bunter, prepare my things. We must return to London. It appears Braithwaite's shadows are lengthening and another tale awaits." As they departed into the chill night air, Whimsy allowed himself a faint smile. The world of mystery was unending, an eternal garden where some blooms were as deadly as foxgloves, others as healing as spring's first blossom, and he, its devoted gardener, would tend to them all with the same curious, tireless care. The road ahead was long, but the promise of a new puzzle, and the hope that justice tempered with mercy might yet prevail, spurred his steps into the night.